All right. Welcome everybody. And Gar, as you say, it wouldn't be a week without controversy. Am I paraphrasing you correctly?
Yeah, or a day.
Or every day. Yes, fair enough. All right. And welcome everyone. Let me just check with chat. You bear with me, folks.
Chat, you're seeing us, you hear us?
Yeah, that's what I'm just checking here, Andy. So, and what's interesting, Andy, because I know you've been on in the past when we used to have crowdcasts and everybody could chat. Unfortunately, with the restream, it's only me. But unless if you go out to YouTube yourself, we're working on a solution actually to change that up. Good to see everybody. Where we'll have it on the Right of Boom site, and then bring in ideally some type of chat mechanism so everybody can chat. So, well, good. Well, welcome everybody as you're all settling in here. Good to see you all. Ed, Todd, Chris, welcome everybody. So this is an interesting one in that if you were with us last week, we had Scott Edwards, the CEO of Summit 7 on, and it was awesome. We were talking about this article on CISA being reshaped under the Trump administration. Andy and I had been going back and forth for the past few months. Been really patient for this. Andy, thanks. As we have Right of Boom, but you've done some fabulous work getting a truly audited C3PAO level 2 certification. So I really wanted to congratulate you on that, bring you on, and have people understand what that process looks like. And
just in time for deregulation. Congrats, man.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. We'll see if the wisdom pans out in the long haul, but I'm pretty confident it will. But I'm sure we'll get into that.
Yeah. And then, as Gary, you said, a day, not even a week goes by, but in between those two things, lo and behold, we have the Signal incident, or is it now being dubbed Signalgate? So I thought that we'd spend some time, because I think there are some lessons learned here, truly, for MSPs. This is
maybe not everybody knows what you're talking about. I would kind of level set it.
Okay, yeah, fair enough, Gary. Thanks for that. So I'll when I hand it to Gary, I'll put up some URLs for you all that in case you'd like to read about it. But basically what happened was, as you all know, we did some airstrikes on Yemen, and the planning process and the diligence and any types of classified things, first of all, historically in the United States, DOD or things that happen in the federal government that are classified, they're documented. So that there are records, and people can that are in the know can have that information and look at it. What occurred in this case was, for those of you that have your handy phone, was that people in the DOD started and advisors to Trump started a Signal chat. And again, I'm paraphrasing, so don't hold me to the letter of law, every fact. But basically, a Signal chat was started. One of the individuals added, it would be like, hey, I'm going to add Gary Pica, thinking it's a Gary Pica that should have been in the know. Unfortunately, this Gary Pica person happened to be a reporter, and who stayed in the chat long enough to actually, see all of these classified information on the planning of the attacks before he reclused himself out of the chat. And then later on, obviously, basically went and did for lack of a better word, expose and reported on what had occurred. So is pretty good, Gary, summation of it?
Yeah. And for those who don't know, Signal is a chat, encrypted chat application.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
but it's commercial. It's commercial.
Yep.
Application. It's not a government application. It's a commercially used. You could use it.
Fair enough. Yeah. Thanks for setting the stage on that, Gary, and bringing that to everybody's attention. So with that, Gary, let me introduce Andy first, and certainly Joy, Bob, you're a regular, you're always welcome. But Andy, thanks for joining us. It's been a while since having you on here, but welcome back, and again, congrats to you. Tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, well, always a pleasure to jump back on the cyber call. Andy Sauer, I'm the CEO of Sentinel Blue, and I'll talk a bit about Sentinel Blue in a sec, but my MSP roots go back 15 years now. I started out as a help desk technician, and I spent a decade, just about a decade in a growing MSP. So I was the first employee at said MSP and always stayed in sort of the technical realm, and I left to take a stint somewhere else with a lower pace, and that other place happened to be a defense contractor. And this was back in 2017, which was right around the time this little thing, DFAR 7012, was making waves, and NIST 800-171. So I spent a couple of years at that defense contractor focusing on NIST compliance, which is now what has turned into CMMC. And so I left that role and decided, hey, I built a skill set building NIST 800-171 compliance. I had this skill set from being an MSP, and I had a network that sort of organically formed of people trying to figure out how are we all going to do this. There was enough there to combine all that together, and that was the genesis of Sentinel Blue. It was marrying up those skill sets and working, that network to see what I could do to help others. So Sentinel Blue, from day one, has been an MSP, MSSP that services exclusively defense and federal contractors. So that's been our mission focus from day one, which has been an absolute luxury for us in pursuing things like certification, because we didn't have the massive tech debt that companies, MSPs generally have, that they then have to refit and refocus to something like CMMC, let alone all the process requirements that they would have to go back and change. So that's been my core focus, and part of why we haven't talked in some time is my head's been down. Our company's head has been very much down for years, working toward this end. And hey, we're one of several who have our certs under our belt. Summit 7 also has their cert under their belt. There's a small group of MSPs who I think have really emerged as the early leaders, but it's, to the audience here, I would say it's definitely not too late to throw your hat in and get involved. Don't take our early lead as some exclusionary measure. It's still wide open, and boy, does the DIB need help.
Yeah, and the demand is going to be there, Andy. And I just want to say
Absolutely.
this. Yeah, Andy, Gary, your comment on this too. Andy, to go, you and I have known each other a long time, and to see what you've done is truly awesome. Like when it shows, someone that, you don't typically say, oh, you're a help desk person, now to become your own MSP and to get the level of, certification, you really, hats off to you, man. That is,
I appreciate that. It's been a roller coaster. The help desk tech in you never leaves. And one thing I'm finding as we're growing, my desire to jump in and solve problems causes more problems than it solves, these days. But that's hard DNA to get out.
I was going to say, I think Gary, as a business owner, would like to beat that help desk out of you, but.
Well, listen, my team finally stopped allowing me to commit code to Git, so all my pull requests just get denied by default now. So they've said no more scripting. You're not up to standard. So hey, it starts somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I have a whole theory about where support will be and the massive changes in the next 5 to 7 years that will hit MSPs, but that will have to be for another.
We could spend a day on that for sure.
Yeah, another call. So here's where I want to start. Like,
oh, Gary, can I just let Joyce just say a quick who she is? Apologies.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. Just quick.
That's okay.
Joy, welcome, and another person who's done some amazing stuff over the last few years. So, Joy, welcome.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm excited to be here. It's actually my first time on the show, but I've watched many times and participated in the chat. And I'm also a big fan of Andy's, and really enjoy every time that I see him present or speak or even blog. I laughed last week when I read some kind of a blog about him being like his staff carrying him away from the keyboard or something, like hands off. And I can relate to all that so much. I had my own MSP for 21 years. And when I sold that practice back in 2018, it was so that I could create a cybersecurity fundamentals course for MSPs. And really, it was the first introduction for a lot of folks like Matt Lee, who always is, like Joy's the reason I got into cyber. It was because I taught the NIST CSF class with Continuum back in the day. And those and the CIS controls, which we all love. So that was really a neat experience. And when I decided to refocus on the defense industrial base, it's really because I'm very, just at the core of it, I'm mission driven and I'm very patriotic. And I was looking at what could I do to make an impact that is much broader than just the MSP industry now. And as Andy will tell you, what we do, it is really hard to integrate all of these compliance controls into service delivery. And when you're doing it on behalf of so many, it'll be tens of thousands of contractors in the defense industrial base that we support in the MSP industry. So it has to be done right. And it's really just one of the biggest honors that I've had in my career is to be where I'm at now, leading the compliance team at Summit 7 for our own internal cybersecurity compliance, and having undergone hands-on with the assessors, going through that audit. It's really a phenomenal thing to experience as, the one who's in the hot seat, because I've been teaching the cybersecurity boot camp since 2021. I think is when we first started the CCP classes. And so, 4 years later, to turn around and not just be teaching it and doing the auditing, but in the hot seat myself, has been a transformative experience. And I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks for the overview, Joy. All right, Mr. Pika, let you kick it off here, and we'll get into some.
First off, I'm watching some of the chat. I want to start off by saying this is a security discussion, not a political discussion. It's hard with something like this not to have it, kind of lop over. So we want to try to stick to it from that standpoint.
Gary, I can't believe that would happen in our country these days.
Well, look, I want to talk about what MSPs can learn about this access control, but there's a number of things here, right? The use of a personal cell phone, the use of a commercial app, even though it's encrypted, access control of who gets added, how it's monitored, alerted. Can you kind of take us through your thought process on that kind of multi-layered, what we can learn from this, and what can an MSP actually take away?
Yeah, so the first thing in all this is, it's kind of funny. We happened to be in a CMMC level 2 assessment with a client last week as this was all happening. And so we're having the day in conversation with a company that's fairly far removed from the serious supply chain. They make a part that goes on a part that goes in an assembly, that goes on a platform, that goes on a weapon system. And they're like, man, we're getting scrutinized to this minutia level. And then the highest levels of the defense, architecture of our country are, just blatantly flying in the face of that. Just made an interesting juxtaposition as a starting point of, hey, this is what's going on. I guess I'm still kind of processing how wild it is. Just the loss of OPSEC and the way it was done. And there's a lot we can learn in there. For me, I think a lot of security, not to get into the technical, is just situational awareness around security and the need to maintain situational awareness. If any one of the other 15 people in that group chat had the situational awareness to occasionally check who were the members of that chat, as I do most of the time before I send a mass email, make sure everyone that I've put in the to or CC is someone that I intended that to reach. That situational awareness would have prevented that OPSEC breach. Also, the situational awareness of understanding, hey, the information we're communicating on this platform is probably not appropriate for this platform. I know, and I see in the chat some splitting of hairs over whether it was truly classified or not. I think I saw someone say, this is the first time in my life that I've seen specifics regarding attack times and weapons platforms and whatnot. So I guess there's a technical argument to be made that they can declassify it or determine it was not classified, but certainly sensitive and confidential, and should not be open to the mistake of accidentally adding, the wrong person. One of the big things I also, think we can learn from this is that we have controlled information systems for a reason. If you're going to work with like the defense industry, one of the big concepts that we work with contractors on is enclaves. Some of them don't put their whole enterprise into a compliant state to handle CUI. They build an enclave, and that gives them a certain level of control to only put in the people who are going to have access and need access to that data to be in there. The appropriate system to discuss and handle those communications and that data has been purposely designed to do that. Use of Signal in this way, I understand what they're trying to do, and I can kind of, forgive them on some level of what they're trying to do there. But there's a reason why we have these classified information systems, or these more confidential, secured, monitored, and professionally managed environments, because no one would have been able to add a journalist to one of those environments had somebody, requested they be added.
Yeah.
Outside of that, the only other thought I had there is just least privilege necessary is always the name of the game. It's just a good reminder, like, keep your situational awareness for sure, but also constantly be revisiting who has access. Should they have access? Is this relevant to them? We occasionally go through, as Joy knows, we occasionally have to go through in a procedure to validate all the user accounts and all the authorized users who have access to our environment to catch that old stuff that sort of lingers and make sure, does that make sense? That this person in this role has access to this Microsoft team? They're not involved in that. Remove them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Gary, it's interesting. It's like, I was thinking, I see Chris Lair out there, Andy, and I really like the point you brought up. It's like Chris will talk about RMM, right? And that, being on a flat network, the equivalent of an enclave, like the marketing team need to be on the same network or non-segmented area as an RMM, as an example, right? It's that same kind of concept of, least privilege needs to have access to these things, right?
Yeah, I was thinking about, if everyone might not go back this far of Get Smart, but we got to go back to the cone of silence. Like 2 hair dryers came down.
Yes.
And
fish bowls.
Yeah, which is basically what they use in government normally. Is you're in the building in a specific room. It's basically a cone of silence.
Yeah, it's a skip, right?
What's normally used. Yeah. So, look, the Pentagon had kind of warned against these things. So what do you think happens to have this get to like the highest level that it can get to, right? The Secretary of Defense. Like, how many, like, if it wasn't the government, if this was just a big organization that you were talking to, how would you try to go down to figure out, like, how does it get to this point?
Yeah, so obviously it's a politically charged topic, but in general, I don't attribute to malice what can be attributed to what we'll call incompetence. And I'm not making a statement about the administration, saying maybe they were well-intentioned to start. There's certainly a political angle that I know I've seen and heard a lot, like, hey, this is a purposeful way of getting around FOIA requests and whatnot. We could table that for the moment and assume they have good intention. And that good intention may just be they want a way to communicate amongst what would otherwise be a very onerous group of people to try to regularly communicate with. So like I said, I can kind of almost forgive the intent of having a high contact, low threshold to communication option for the most high level national security advisors in the administration. I understand how awesome it is to be able to send a quick text and say, hey, everyone in the national security apparatus, we're launching attacks at this time, so you know what to do, in response. I understand what they're going for, so I can see it in that light of, as amateurish as it may seem or be in truth the loss of OPSEC. Okay, maybe it's well intentioned, but someone somewhere had to tell these folks at some point this was not an appropriate avenue. And I think they're just probably pushing the bubble a little bit too far. It might have started fairly innocuous of, hey, just a bit of, I'll be here at this time. Will you be there? That kind of coordination. And, grew into, hey, this is how we're going to communicate. What time we're launching F-18s.
In every organization, large and small, right?
Yeah.
And I like how you tie that in, Gary, because really, number one, whether it's the government or it's an enterprise organization, trying to secure voice, quick chats, quick text, those kinds of communications in my mind is one of the hardest things, because there is that borderline of, it's not marked CUI or classified. We're actually talking like in fast discourse about something real time. And so that's always going to be one of those things that among the highest level stakeholders is hard to control. And then you have on top of that, like, let's go back for a minute to the Hillary days. Who was in charge of telling Hillary Clinton you're not allowed to have an email server at your home that's processing government information? And how was that greeted by somebody that had the power and the control? And so whether it's a private organization, a commercial organization, the government, we all have to be mindful that there's only so much you can force, as if you're the IT person or the security person, upon the people that are in charge. And even if it is supposed to be regulated or falling under any kind of compliance or classification, it's a really difficult thing to navigate.
Joy, you also bring up a good point about these types of communication platforms, which are becoming, first of all, like I talk about John Strand, like his one of their top ways in which they'll compromise an environment today is standing up Teams infrastructure and posing as, somebody, that's related some way, shape, or form to the organization. And so to your point, these are control, areas that companies do, whether they're big enterprises, government, or SMB, really need to be mindful of what's happening in these types of platforms.
Mm-hmm. And from a mobile device, in my mind, it's the hardest, because you'll see a name, but even just like for emails, I'll see Andrew Morgan and it doesn't say Andrew's exact email address and his company name unless I hit reply and do, expand it. And so the mobile devices always makes it that much harder to identify who's on what. And I'm not removing responsibility or abdicating responsibility for it at all. I'm just saying it's one of the harder forms of communication to secure.
Yeah. So that kind of leads to the next question. Like, at the highest level of security, government or private industry, should we be using personal cell phones? Like, Andy, I would ask you that. Like,
yeah.
Is it because all of those can be compromised, right, by foreign adversaries in theory?
Yeah, absolutely. I think of Pegasus. So think of Pegasus malware. Am I giving feedback? Do you hear feedback all of a sudden?
There was like a blender going all of a sudden. Are you doing your Nutra bullet right now?
Might be lunchtime. I'll check on that in a sec. But certainly Pegasus malware or spyware that we know that's commercially available to nation state actors, that's available. And there was a zero-click exploit with which they could basically root an iOS device, right? And if you have root iOS access, even Signal, which is encrypted at rest, there are ways to get keys out of the iOS keychain for a sophisticated actor. So having things on, uncontrolled personal devices, it's absolutely a vulnerability. It's an attack surface that is unnecessary because there are ways to eliminate it.
And Gary, it's a great question about, because this is something Eric Woodard did, I think, a fantastic job when he works with companies on BYOD, and who owns what. It's like, the whole shared responsibility matrix, right? He's like, you're not going to let me secure your mobile devices, yet you also want me to be responsible if one of those is used to compromise your environment. That's
when everything you have on your desktop is now on your mobile phone.
Right.
Everything.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good, lesson. And for those of you that, have ever heard Eric talk about this, it's really well done how he carves these controls out. And he uses IG1 and CIS to do so. So good. Yeah. Please continue. Yeah.
So last question I had was, like, how can organizations have stricter policies to prevent unauthorized disclosures? You mentioned one, which is enclaves, but what are some other, like, basic stuff for the average MSP who's working with, SMBs?
Yeah. One of the thoughts I have in talking about all this is just a reminder. We do all this talk about nation state preparation, and all the protections we need in place. And this is your real threat across your client base for most MSPs. Once you eliminate the RDP that's internet facing and the MFA, like your real risk is this sort of stuff, and it's insider risk that is, malicious or not. And in this case, I think the person who invited the journalist in seems to indicate that was all inadvertent and accidental, but that's kind of the real risk, is the user's misuse of the technology.
Yeah, that's the worst part of it. I would,
right.
I would rather, yeah.
And how do you control for that? I mean,
yeah,
MSPs, I could wax about this, but we're fighting a hard fight to begin with, being information security professionals. We're fighting it on hard mode because our relationship with the people we're trying to secure is transactional, and there's an exchange of money with which people want to minimize how much they're paying you. So it's already like making a hard thing happen on hard mode. So it's all very difficult, and good luck going to any company and telling their highest level people, hey, you guys really can't iMessage each other or signal each other about our most proprietary and secure stuff. They're going to tell you, like, go back to the closet IT people. So that's tough. A lot of that comes down to communication and, the discussions that you have in trying to get buy-in from the highest level across your client base, that these are serious conversations and serious capabilities that are not silos of IT. Your whole businesses now operate on IT. This is a core discipline that your business needs to, invest time, resources, and executive understanding to, the same as your finances, the same as how you're building your talent pool. This has to be core to that.
So an average American is looking at this and they're either thinking, wow, that's bad, or they're thinking everybody makes mistakes. As IT folks, security folks, we're looking at it and saying, how could this possibly happen? Like, how many failures does there have to be in protocols, in training, and what could lie under that at levels down?
Sure.
Like, if this happened to the CEO of a company that had 1,000 employees that we supported, like, what would you be thinking? Like, that's how I think about this.
Gary.
Yeah, well, you mentioned training, and part of this, I think, is one, it's a showcase of technical illiteracy, but it's kind of one that we've foisted on ourselves as a community a bit. So we've been pushing encryption. Great, we need to push encryption. But I think that's allowed the non-technical folks to assume, hey, I'm using something that's encrypted, so it's safe. Well, if that were the case, the whole internet would be safe because everything's TLS encrypted these days. But we need to teach people about access control. We need to teach people about, again, go back to that situational awareness. I think training as a broad topic in information security is one of our, I think we have one of the least sophisticated approaches. I think it gets the least amount of attention, and I think it's across the board poorly done and doesn't affect outcomes beyond training people to recognize like base level phishing and giving them a button to click. But do we assume these people have received some sort of informed training and briefing that really detailed things like access control and evaluating who they're talking to about what?
I'm going to guess no at this point. That's the
Well,
guess.
I don't know. I mean, let's be mindful. The guy thought he was adding in a valid person into the chat, right? He grabbed the wrong person to add him in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to attribute malice to it. I don't know exactly what the sequence there was, but
it was malice. I think it was just a user error.
Right, but who hasn't? I've tried to send Andrew an email.
Errors at that level. That's the whole point. There has to be checks and balance. Listen, my daughter works for a law firm. She has 2 laptops and she has 2 phones. Okay, that laptop and that phone is completely locked down. And does she like it? No, because when she is working, she has to always carry 2 phones, and it's a big expense to the law firm. But it sounds like the law firm has higher security than government.
But you bring up a really good point, Gary, because I was just going to say, well, what about a law firm, right, that might be working a high IP case, or working on a large transaction? That these are companies we as MSPs could be supporting, right? Or some type of M&A deal, right, that could be going on. And what if, those types of things that we think, oh, well, it's just an SMB, but there are big ramifications to those types of things.
Yeah, insider trading, security secrets, stolen corporate espionage. It's exactly the same as this, right?
Right.
To me. Yeah. But I feel like our government should have a higher level of standards with all this than my daughter's law firm.
I'd love for Chris Laird to comment as we go to you, Bob. I'd love Chris to share like what would happen, when he's doing IR, if all of a sudden, the breach attorneys using this with the defer organization and something were to happen from a forensics perspective that now is discoverable. Like I think there are ramifications and carryover to what we in our world do. So anyway, Mr. Miller, over to you.
Yeah, I was so glad that Gary had that section of the discussion today, because I knew it was going to be difficult. But I want to add just one thing. All right, being an MSP, we have healthcare customers, right? And we're in communications with them, working on problems all the time. And if we were, which involve HIPAA compliance and other things of that nature, right? And if we were to inadvertently add somebody on our side, even by accident, whoopsie would not be the thing that we would need to be. That would not be our out. Whoopsie would not be our out at that point, right? We would have to actually report that up and it go to the regulatory authorities, because we will have violated regulations. So the thing is, it's just a common sense thing, right? I mean, I think a lot is being made to try and change the narrative, but the bottom line is, if we did something like that, we'd be held responsible. I mean, that's just how it works. It's not optional for us. So, but getting away from that subject as fast as we can.
It is something of a minefield, is it not?
Yes, yeah. Nobody's happy, no matter where they're.
No, well, can we be honest? Like it's because right now, we are, even with this is a good idea of saying how people value ideology over facts today, right? And so what, Bob, you're saying, this is less about ideology, whether you're a Republican or Democrat, independent, left, right, whatever. If you look at this in a vacuum, the factual parts of it is what you're saying.
I'm just saying, if I am held to a different standard than that I perceive as being held in this case on lesser things. It's the same thing you're saying when you say law firms got different rules apparently than other people. So I mean, look, it is what it is, and everybody's going to have their own opinion about it and their own position.
Could I soapbox to close this out? Because
please honestly, do, so we can get out of it. Yeah,
it serves a narrative that I do try to remind people of. When you have interaction with people who are part of the institutions, you will generally find that they are very human, and institutions are very easy to illustrate as these massive monoliths. You get the Jason Bourne kind of idea of what the CIA is, where it's the big command center and they can zoom in with a satellite to see your face and all that. At the end of the day, these institutions are serviced by people at the highest levels, and they make human errors at this level. So I think it serves to inform that narrative. Like, there's a lot of conspiratorial sort of thought around institutions. There's a lot of institutional skepticism of American institutions in particular these days. Just be reminded that the people with the most power in the American government, the most powerful government on the face of the earth, made this level of a mistake.
Yeah.
Just keep that in mind.
Yeah, 100%.
Well said, Andy.
Yes, 100%. All right, Andy, let's talk about something that won't get us all killed. Right? So you just managed to get through your, you guys accomplished something very important, right? Which is your C3PAO, and also obviously you had to have your CMMC level 2. So yeah. I think it's really interesting because most people do not know the uphill battle it is in some cases to kind of get even a CMMC level 1 certification, much less a level 2. And everybody kind of associates that with bureaucracy and all of the paperwork required to kind of pull that off. Could you kind of put that in context about, from we're SOC 2 type 2, and that takes a lot of work. You know what I mean? And CMMC 2 requires another load of work. So why don't you put in context, what kind of workload that really is?
So I may struggle to relate with other MSPs on this at some level, because again, Sentinel Blue, we have this luxury that I knew day one what we were going to be about, and it was going to be about this. And I had a background in it that serviced that. So we were able to, from day one, architect at a technical level how we were going to build our tool set, because we understood what requirements are going to need to be met. So, we were on Microsoft 365 GCC High from day one. Like, we knew that's where we needed to be. So a lot of the challenge that I think other MSPs have, and I know this from talking to a lot of my peers who have done it, that pivot, just from a tooling standpoint, is a challenge. Let alone one of the things I think that is unique about CMMC is the level of knowledge goes much deeper than the control set. At a surface level, CMMC level 2 has 110 requirements that are in that document, and it references NIST 800-171. They're literal mirrors of each other. 110 controls, but when you dig a little deeper, you find out it's not 110 controls. It's 320 objectives that need to be met that combined implement the 110 controls. So once you've contextualized, oh, I need to do the 110, then someone pulls that rug from under you and says, actually, you need to do the 320. And then if you do a little more digging, you find out, well, why is this even being stipulated? Well, it's coming from DFAR 7012. So now you got to go read the DFAR 7012, which is defense regulation. And then you see, okay, this is just one of the requirements. The others are we have to have incident response to tell the government within 72 hours of an incident. And if we're going to use cloud services, they have to be FedRAMP moderate or equivalent. Well, what does that mean? What's equivalent? Now you got to go read the DoD memo about it. And then there's the requirements around handling CUI. Now you got to go read the CUI stipulations and regulations. And you have to build this wealth of knowledge, which Joy and I can both tell you is a literal full-time job. In some cases, it's the full-time job of a whole department at certain organizations in this space, because there's so much nuance. And then because it's defense work, it's federal contracting work, it has its fingers, in so many other things. There's export control. Now you're in the Department of State and their requirements around ITAR and export control. And it just becomes so much to wrap your head around that for a lot of smalls and mediums, what they've done for the last decade has been bury their heads in the sand and just say, someone will eventually come and tell me what I'm supposed to do because I can't make sense of all this. And I think that's probably true for a lot of MSPs who have had clients kind of ask about this over the last couple of years. They've probably kind of punted and said, like, we've got our SOC 2 Type 2. We've done ISO. How bad can a list of controls really be? Well, it's a lot more than just a list of controls. I mean, it becomes a deep level of programming. So when you talk about, the mountain of the approach here to get there and things like bureaucracy, it's a ton. It's a ton of knowledge work. And it's a big technical shift. And on top of all of that, it's procedural and process. You have to have process to demonstrate that these controls are in place. By the way, the vast majority of the controls are not technical controls. They're process, they're procedure. They're validating that you're, managing the environment in a competent way. And hey, which IT community struggles the most with process and procedure and documentation? Isn't that kind of the legendary status of MSPs? Like, that's been the struggle. And you have a lot of people like me who lead MSPs who were technical out of the gate and who always struggled to document and still do. That's been a lot of the challenge. It's comprehensive, man. It's deep, and you have to do the work to build the knowledge. And it's not something that you're just going to be able to inherit or knock out in a weekend project. And if you try it, you will get your clock cleaned.
Yeah, it's just a tremendous amount of overhead. I mean, I know even for SOC 2 Type 2, it was 80% of it was putting processes and procedures in place so that we could audit and track that we were actually following the rules and regulations that are specified, right? Specified in the controls. So it's the same thing. Like you said, it's an expansion of that same process, building on top of it. And I would also say it's an economic decision, just like you're pointing out, is you got to be willing. If you're going to go after a very specific market, you got to know what the investment's going to require to get you in there. Yeah. That's people, time, process, right? That's how that works.
Out of the gate, so we're in GCC High, but then any infrastructure we host in Azure Government because we're trying to stay within this data sovereignty bubble. Out of the gate, our operational costs have like a 30 to 50% higher rate than what we would otherwise pay in commercial, just for licensing and just for usage of the Azure tools that we use. Right. And we've built our entire practice on Microsoft 365. Our whole SOC is built on Microsoft Sentinel. So our overhead cost is significant just to operate, let alone everything else.
Can you speak? I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're on a crucial point. If you could speak to not just where the cloud contents are and the tools, but also outsourced people that a lot of MSPs could leverage.
Yeah, so we made a lot of decisions. Again, we had the luxury of making these decisions from a place of being informed that we opted not to third party anything. So we knew we had to build a SOC. There are a lot of great SOC options available to the MSP market. Some of the most reputable, beloved companies in the space have offerings that, service as a SOC that we had to say no to, or that even in some cases we put in place and then found out later, oh, okay, there's ties to a foreign country here where, there are personnel who service it that we weren't aware of, that we've had to now excise from our tech stack. And you have to do this thinking, but you have to have that background of knowledge to understand, hey, if you consume this tool where they're actually servicing it by people in Canada,
Yeah, that sounds
all
that sounds expensive, Andy.
It's wildly expensive.
Yeah. Well,
because you have to have U.S. citizens, well, not citizens, U.S. persons if you're going to serve export controlled clients, which a lot of defense contractors are. And if they're not yet,
$1 million a seat.
They want to be.
It's a lot.
But in all seriousness,
Jerry, if that's going to be your advice to how we price it, listen, I know you're well educated on it, so I'll have to follow it.
Gary, but we hear about all the process he went through. How, if you were advising him or somebody that goes through this, and you hear about these, increases, significant increase, how do you go about your modeling again, knowing, hey, I can't outsource, I've got to build a SOC, I can't, my licensing cost is going to go from here up 35%. You've got like this incredible way to look at margin. Like, how does this kind of flip things around for you?
I think in general, it's the same scale we have, which is understanding your costs and what your target margins are. And then based on that price, can you show a customer value? And so I just think where Andy lives is on the far upper right quadrant of that. And it means that you have to market your business in a different kind of way, because the whole audience, the whole TAM is not available to you. A much smaller section of that TAM who understand this value are there, but you're also going to have less competition because very few people can get to where Andy's gotten his business to. So I think it's like every MSP today needs to know where they need to live. A smaller, more immature MSP shouldn't be wasting time, even if it's a referral, on types of companies who need a higher level of maturity than what they offer. Like, that's not a good business model. So I think everyone, what I tell our peer members is everyone needs to be self-aware about where they are today and market to those customers that can live with wherever their maturity is. And then if they choose to, they can build maturity and move to different customers. And I think it applies here. It's just that, again, very targeted audience and very few set of real competitors where Andy is.
Yeah, I agree. So Andy, I mean, you guys went through and actually got your C3PAO, right? Did you observe any changes in your organization about how they kind of viewed security after going through the process of actually getting a C3PAO certification? How did that change their outlook? And I don't mean just about federal clients, but because I would expect this has an impact across the board.
Yeah, so we had our first, prior to the C3PAO assessments of your status, there's a government side program called DIBCAC, which you'll sometimes hear thrown around, DIBCAC high assessments. And that's the DoD's DCMA, Defense Contract Management Agency, has a group that will come out and assess companies' compliance against functionally CMMC level 2, NIST 800-171. We had been through a couple of those, and then in January, we had our first true C3PAO assessment of us for our certification. Collectively, the experience, and we just had another one last week, which we passed. So, hey, we've had a number of these, and we continue to learn how important it is for us to hold our ground, especially with clients who want to ask us to change the program. And it's got to the point, our sales team, our marketing team's pretty well trained on like, hey, we can't deviate. And we're getting good at communicating why we can't deviate. We have a lot of, prospects who, hey, we like what you're offering, but can we do this piece of it? And we have to tell them, no, you can't. Or you have to do it our way, because it's all interconnected. Once you sat on the other side of the table from an assessment team who's going to tear you apart for a couple of days, you're going to feel really bad about the idea of losing control over the consistency of your service delivery and of your security program. So culturally, I mean, that's challenged us, especially as a growing MSP. When you want to say yes to everything, all new business feels like good business, all revenue feels like good revenue. It's really challenged us to, stick to our guns and turn away prospects who don't get that part of it and who say like, hey, we really want to do our thing. We just kind of want you to augment. I always tell them, like, listen, I don't want to be part of something that I don't think is highly likely to be successful. And that's not going to be highly likely to be successful.
Are you saying that not all MRR is good MRR?
Gary, I'm in
You know what? I think I'm going to make a
my
video.
fifth
on
year,
that.
so I can finally stuff.
Oh, wait, I already did.
Listen, I maybe have consumed that at some point, but building up the
I
courage,
think I have a
as a
T-shirt with
growing
that on
MSP
it
to say
somewhere.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
But
I
That's
mean,
a cultural challenge. I mean, for
Mhm.
salespeople who their money's tied to what they sell,
Yeah.
it's hard to get them to agree to that.
Well, and think about this. Think about you're an MSP, like many MSPs who don't really have great sales and marketing, so everything's been a referral. And in the old days, every referral, if they had a pulse and a checkbook, they were a good prospect. And now they're not. You can get referrals that you're either A, on one side, not really qualified to have as a customer, or on the other end, they don't fit your profile. And so it does change the business model that we now need to have sales, marketing, and targeting as part of our skill set.
Yeah.
I think too that the CMMC ecosystem is a different animal in that, our customers must have their assessments done. It's very very small percentage now that will be able to self-attest and instead are going to be required to have a third party come in and validate their implementation. And the MSPs that are choosing to be certified are basically living the blood, sweat, and tears of that process themselves. But even though I look at the seat conversation, the price per seat conversation that is necessitated when you have an MSP that is CMMC level 2, and as Andy was saying, our tools are more expensive, our personnel are more expensive. We have these very mature operations compared to where the MSP industry usually is. And when that translates into what the price tag is for the end customer, we're looking at that and saying, yeah, but look how much of this you get to inherit because we are validated already. And that concept of inheritance is a huge thing. I mean, outsourcing your MSP or your IT services, historically, we've always had that argument of, look, you can hire in-house people to do your IT for you, or for a fraction of that cost, you can outsource it to us as an MSP. Well, just, if you add to that the cost of very specific compliance knowledge and architecture knowledge that these contractors have to be able to outsource that, and then also to outsource inheriting those capabilities pre-validated, if you will, there's a definite return on investment conversation you can have in this part. MSPs who choose to go after this and do it well, get their own certification, they can definitely substantiate that higher cost per seat. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Yeah.
That at some level that assumes, we've had a lot of luxury. There's been a lot of luck in Sentinel Blue's growth, and a lot of it has been reputational because of the network that we're tapped into, and the success we've had. We have a track record of success. This last week, if you combine the DibCACs and CMMC certs we've supported, we're batting 100%. And as Joy pointed out, the client base here has a requirement to fulfill this. This is a no failure allowed. When they're going through their selection process to find the right partner, they want the most assured path, also the cheapest path, but the most assured path to the outcome. And so for us, going back to why we turn certain deals away if we don't think they're going to be successful, well, if we've worked so dang hard to build a reputation of assurance toward that outcome, that's not worth our time and effort to potentially lower our batting average. We're not going to swing at that if it's very likely to miss.
Hey, listen,
and so
you could bet 275 and go to the Hall of Fame.
That's right.
In baseball.
Yeah.
See, I don't know anything about baseball, so I'll assume that's true.
That's
Hey,
So I got one more question before I hand it off to
unless you
Roy.
gamble.
But Andy, it sounds like, and my question, I think you've kind of answered it, but I thought I'd give you one more shot at how is having gone through this changed the way you approach a customer now? I mean, how's that discussion changed after you have completed these certifications? And I think we've talked a little bit about it, but is there anything else that sticks out that we haven't really talked about?
Well, I'll be clear to my peers who might be in the audience space here. You have serious competitors in Sentinel Blue and companies like Summit 7 who have gone off, done the work, and have the certs, and you should rest assured that if we're in contest with you, over a prospect, we will be flexing that. I mean, that is a huge accomplishment of ours, and we can demonstrate the value these clients are looking for, the outcome they're looking for. And so we wear it on our sleeve, and we'll tell the prospects, listen, if you want to work toward this and you want the most assured outcome, this is going to be professionally delivered by a company that knows what they're doing. Here's our track record. Here's the proof, the validation. We've gone off and done it ourselves. That's how serious we are about this. I could tell you that's very moving to the client base who needs this. And so if you're an MSP and you want to approach this and offer this, again, you can't dabble in it. You have to go in. You have to be able to tell a story similar to the one that I can tell, similar to the one that Joy and Summit 7 can tell, of the expertise, the attention, the involvement, the putting ourselves forward first and bringing you along versus what I think a lot of MSPs that we regularly come in after, who took on a more reactive, like, hey, client, why don't you tell us what to do and we'll do it? That's not working. These clients don't have a good experience with you. Then they come to companies like us and we say, hey, we'll direct it.
You know what's funny? You're talking about this and explaining it in your very specific world that you live in and all this training. But everything you just said could apply to every single MSP at every level, is that they build process, they build a certain level of maturity, they build out roles and process so that when they sit with a prospect, they can differentiate themselves from whoever they compete against. And so you had to do this to get to where you are, but this is the same thing we try to teach every MSP at every level of maturity. Like, this is why you try to get to the next level of operational maturity, because people always think they have a price problem, but they don't. They have a value problem, and the value problem is based on maturity, knowledge, experience, all the things that you're describing. So, Andrew, this is applicable for everyone who's listening, regardless of where they are on their journey. This is just showing you, again, to the, all the way out to the right-hand side of that model where Andy lives. It's given us a great view.
Yeah, it made me think about, Gary, all the years I worked with you, of those conversations about belief systems you talked about, right? Were built around doing the hard work. Andy and Joy, in listening to Andy's story today, he's forced to do the hard work.
Yeah, I don't want to compete against Andy. Listen, I can feel his belief. I don't want to compete against that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. He's in a sale. You can see him in a sales process, in a deal, and his conviction, right? I know what it takes, right? And that's powerful.
Yep. But my point is, every MSP, wherever they are at their level, needs to feel the same way. This is 100%. How you grow and how you push to the next level of operational maturity. And it takes a great level of command over the business model as well as the security model.
100%.
Joy, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you. Just to follow up what Gary was saying too, though, I remember presenting at a conference a couple of years ago where I was talking about the difference between an MSP and an MSSP. And when you're implementing your own framework on your own environment and with your team and going through that maturity process, that I don't consider you an MSSP unless you've had a third party come in to validate how you've implemented, because my thing is, you never know what you don't know. And so it's really important. And I remember that it just caused massive heartburn in the audience. And people were saying, what do you mean I have to have someone else come in and validate it? Well, I do think that that's an incredible part of the maturation process. And Andy, I wanted to get your perspective on that. Like, do you feel that with everything as a C3PAO, being able to do these assessments, was it for you something that was even up to that next level, that you do recommend to have a third party come in and validate your own environment?
Yeah, it certainly has required us to think very carefully and be more purposeful, because now it's not just defending it to ourselves and our own way of thinking. We're having to explain our architecture and how we thought about it to third parties who don't have our biases and who don't have our experience, who weren't privy to those conversations. So after our first, C3PAO assessment, having been prompted by some questions we didn't anticipate, that we thankfully had answers for, but we're like, oh, dang, that was a good question. Never really thought of it that way. having that third party view at it has made us go back and think a little more carefully and make sure, okay, does this all truly make sense? Let's look at it from that outside perspective. And having that validation is amazing. I mean, I sleep so much better at night now that I know it's not just my team and ourselves blowing smoke at it, at ourselves. Someone else has come in and scrutinized us and evaluated whether or not we're realistically there.
Awesome. And then, when I know that you already had in mind your tech stack as you were building this out, which was a lot different from having to rip and replace like a lot of MSPs will have to do. But was there some part of that in the whole preparation process that you had underestimated? And can you give us a little bit more color as to what that looked like?
I think I still underestimate the documentation and process side of things. And we've done 4 CMMC certs at this point. And after each one, I tell the team, I'm like, dang, there's some areas of weakness. Like we're passing, but especially around procedural and process, I'm still like, it's not there yet. It's not good enough. I want more there. Because when you have to go defend this and you have to show it and it's scrutinized by people. You really want it to be foolproof. And I have a very high standard myself personally. But when you sit across from an assessment team being scrutinized in this way, like you want to do everything to not be on the back foot. It's not comfortable. I've done 4 of them now. My anxiety definitely picks up the weekend before they start because you're having people come in and evaluate whether everything you've been building for years is in place the way that you say it's in place. That's nerve-wracking, especially for someone like me who, as I mentioned, a bit of a control freak, technical by trade, still got the help desk in me. I've had to let a lot of trust happen and, having other people come in and make sure that your team is operating the way that you've designed it's scary.
And as you know, you can't take your foot off the gas. The continuous monitoring aspects is just something that is brutal if you're not used to being well organized and executing regularly. And Andrew, I hope that you'll forgive me. I want to point out that Andy is one of about a dozen MSPs now that we have on a listing, a formal validated external service provider or ESP marketplace. If you go to mspcollective.org, you'll see the MSPs that have already undergone their CMMC level 2. We were thrilled to be, Andy's team, I think, was one of the first or second that we added in there. And it was kind of funny how the reset happened on when we could announce because of the certificates. But you'll see the list of the dedicated MSPs that are on there for the ESP marketplace. And it's really a cool thing that the MSP Collective came together and made this directory for the contractors who are looking for an MSP that's qualified.
Yeah, no, you guys did a great job with the MSP Collective.
Yeah.
Starting that out.
Andrew, this is great today.
Yeah, thank you.
Really, really good. Andy, really good perspective on things for everyone.
Yeah, cool. I appreciate that. I'm glad I could be of use. It helps on a Monday.
Joy, do you have? I think we have time for one more if you have it. But if you want to wrap it up, that's absolutely fine too. I'm coming up on here on the top of the hour.
Well, I'll just say that I feel like CMMC in particular is different from some of those other movements that we've seen across the MSP industry historically, where there are entities out there saying we can teach you how to be, a CMMC MSP in 3 weeks, or these promised very small lift time and resource commitments, and that is not the case. Like, there's so much liability involved in doing CMMC wrong if you're an MSP. You're talking about the renewal of defense contracts that are hundreds of thousands, but normally millions of dollars for your customers. And if you're the reason they don't get that, think twice. Like, really take CMMC seriously is what I would like to say.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, way to wrap that up, Joy. But yeah, Gary, I think, like you said this, and I'll just reiterate, people should go back and listen to this, whether it's CMC or not, how Andy's belief and what process and determination did for him in the way he approaches his clients and prospects. I think that's, the major thing here.
Absolutely.
You know, that,
Awesome.
and I'll speak to you all on Signal. So just if I reach out to you,
Yeah.
just let me on there. See you, everybody. Have a great week.
See y'all.
Thanks, Andrew.
Bye.